So I'm here with Maxine Doogan, and we want to talk about, what California just did with Senate Bill 1322. It seems that there has been a lot of uproar about it, where basically some people are even thinking of this as legalizing child prostitution, but they just aren't understanding the situation. And I was hoping that Maxine Dugan would have some commentary here. What do you have to say, Maxine?
Sure. So what it is, it's California Senate Bill 1322. It was brought by Senator Holly Mitchell out of Los Angeles. So she's got the chorus of the, nanny state in her ear, screaming at her year in and year out. She's one of the main drafters of trafficking legislation. It's usually always bad, and we always oppose it. And this piece of legislation basically says that the police can no longer arrest youth for prostitution, and we think that that's a good thing. I know people like our defendant in our court case, Nancy O'Malley, the district attorney over there in Alameda County, is unhappy with this bill because her county and her office is the number one office that charges youth with prostitution. Mm-hmm. So she testified, I think, in front of the California State Assembly Public Safety last year when we were all there. We all were testifying too. Had to sit next to her. That she's charging about 20 or 21 kids with prostitution. She can't tell that they are sex trafficking victims as per the, United States Trafficking Victim Protection Act. The federal act defines all youth under 18 as sex trafficking victims. That and even in the Violence Against Women Act, the reauthorization of 2013, the U.S. Senator Leahy got a resolution in there, that act, to say that people under 18 cannot be charged with prostitution because they're not criminals.
They're victims.
So, yeah, they're victims. So, it's within that spirit that they brought forward the state law, that they needed the state law because district attorneys like Nancy O'Malley has been charging youth with prostitution. And then she turns around to the public and does press releases that say she's rescued traffic victims.
Yeah.
Nobody's been rescued.
Right. They've just been arrested.
Yeah, everybody's been arrested for prostitution. They're having criminal cases being adjudicated in criminal court, juvenile criminal court. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to watch this, because, we had some input, on these bills. We always do. And so to see this bill come out that says this, but what this bill also says is that the youth can be taken into protective custody. So that's kind of this, neoliberal, caveat nanny state thing where it gives police the authority essentially to have, sex like they always do with people in these prostitution sting operations. But once they find out that the person that they had sexual contact with under the guise of rescuing them from being a sex trafficking victim, but they're really, running prostitution stings, which means they're going to be charged with prostitution, that they're under 18, that they can still take them to juvenile hall. But they're not going to be charged with a crime. So that means they're going to be taken to juvenile hall and held, but on what terms? Because usually when you're involved in prison, which is what juvenile hall is, there is a process that's because you're being adjudicated for being a criminal.
Right. So you can have a lawyer and you can fight the charge and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're going to have a court date. You have to have a court date within a set amount of time. You're going to get before a judge. You're going to be allowed to be released.
But this removes that.
This removes all that. That the kids can now be held indefinitely in juvenile hall under the guise of being there in some sort of protective custody. And that's the language that this law uses, protective custody. Protective custody is juvenile hall. I mean, how bloody crazy can these neoliberals think that they're going to get away with this? It's the same kind of irresponsible gobbledygook thinking that, that's why Hillary Clinton didn't get elected. None of this type of do-gooder approach, when really what you're talking about is hardcore criminalization, is what anybody wants. Nobody wants anything to do with these types of failed policies. Everybody can see through them. Except for now you have the public latching on to, this inflammatory language of legalizing, prostitution for youth. And that's
Right.
not what this is.
Yeah. No.
There's already youth that are involved in prostitution. But the reason youth are involved in prostitution is because the social safety net is gone in the United States. The social safety net is no longer there. The social workers who are being paid by the state of California to protect children have no such means to do so. They might be able to identify that a youth is involved in prostitution or other types of things that are very exploitive and bad, but they don't have any means to offer any housing to kids. And we know that housing is the number one thing that the youth need. That's what the research shows. Jail is not housing. Juvenile hall is not housing. The research shows that youth need long-term housing. And that's not what juvenile hall is.
Yeah, that one study that the John Jay School of Criminal Justice did in New York City, where over 70% of the youth in the sex trade that they interviewed said that they sought out non-existent services that might have prevented them from from doing survival sex work. And and the great majority of the youth are not being pimped, according to the research that has been done. So articles like Natural News and some of these other articles that are coming out about this the Senate bill, it's just knee-jerk reactions, hysteria, and they don't really understand what the law is about or what's going on with our community, whether we're talking minors or adults. But to not be arrested is a good thing. Otherwise those kids are going to have an even harder time. But they are arresting them in California. They have been arresting them even with the federal laws that tell them not to. So, of course, there needed to be something to make them enforce the federal law, not to arrest people. But, they totally are misunderstanding what's going on here. And you're so right about latching on to those words. And it's so
Yeah.
Orwellian, too. Protective custody is just newspeak for juvenile hall or jail.
Yeah. Well, I think too, the other points that you bring up, Elle, are really important. And one is that there's already laws on the books that criminalize people having sex with youth.
Yeah.
There's already laws on the books that criminalize people being involved with the youth under any sort of in any sort of capacity. I mean, there's already laws against rape. There's already laws against child abuse. It makes me really think about that meeting with the UN a special rapporteur on trafficking where there was a social worker who showed up from Chicago who talked about working at a nonprofit that was by and for youth in the sex trade, but that basically they decided to shut down that nonprofit. The adults did, the adult social workers, because the trafficking laws had gotten so wacky and so extreme in their penalties and in their definition as to include them, the social workers, to be defined as sex traffickers just for being in association with youth in the sex trade.
Yeah.
So, that's the quagmire of layers of years, of decades now, of 15 years now, 17 years now, of bad laws and bad sex trafficking laws that have gone on to conflate all forms of prostitution as sex trafficking and all of our intimate, domestic, and commercial relationships, regardless of our age, as sex traffickers.
Yeah.
So, there's always concern here when you have changes, but I think that the California legislators did hear us loud and clear that criminalizing youth for prostitution is not what the state of California wants to be doing. But, the other parts that they put in there about putting the kids in protective custody, who are they trying to protect these kids from? When the research shows that there's not this that most youth are not involved in, relationships where they're being forced.
And they also report, like through the research of Alexandra Lutnick, that their primary abusers are police officers.
Right.
So, we have a police having sex with minors and adults in the sex trade. That, let's just put them at the forefront of dealing with minors in the sex trade. And this one quote from the Natural News, it says, it calls Nancy O'Malley a national leader on human trafficking issues. And they obviously are not very tuned into Nancy O'Malley. And, Nancy O'Malley loves arresting young people who are working in the sex trade. And this is very destructive to their lives. And, it can only be beneficial to youth in the sex trade that they not be arrested so that they can rebuild their lives. But, it just shows me that these people really, they don't understand. They're speaking, on a subject that they really don't understand at all.
Well, it's not that they don't really understand it. They don't want to hear the part where police are the main perpetrators. They don't want to hear the part where police are having sexual contact in some capacity with the youth. Yeah. Under the guise of arresting them for prostitution. They don't want to take responsibility for the fact that prostitution has been made criminalized by them, the public, the voters, and that they themselves have set the ball in motion for the police to make this legal sexual assault occur.
Yeah.
That the public does not want to take responsibility for that. Nancy O'Malley, the district attorney of Alameda County in California, does not want to take responsibility for that. Whenever we talk about the police having sex with us, under the guise of arresting us for prostitution, under the guise of, rescuing us for, being sex trafficking victims, but really they're charging us with prostitution. The public just seems to ignore that little piece of criminalization. And that piece of criminalization is costing the public hundreds of millions of dollars. And my hope is that with the president-elect that we will get somebody who will finally look at that public waste and put a stop to it. We know that they're already attacking, the first lady-elect, because that's how these, trafficking Nazis work is they go to the wives of these elected officials to bring in their ridiculous laws.
It's like Beth McCann, whatever. She
Oh
was one of
yeah,
those.
her. Oh God,
Yeah.
yeah, she's a nightmare. Yeah, here's everybody drinking Hennessy and Heineken, putting money in her pocket so she can turn around and use her wealth off that alcohol, to bring forward all these bad laws that everybody's going to be charged with. All these customers are going to be charged with being sex traffickers, for being customers of prostitutes, and all this wacky stuff.
Well, we just need to be decriminalized. All of us.
Well,
No more arrests. God, give people a chance to survive.
they don't care about us, they don't care. They really don't care about us. They don't care about the unintended consequences or the intended consequences of criminalization. They're just out to keep us from, um, you know, taking money off their husbands, who are all customers, you know.
Well, well, any last words on that or?
Happy New Year.
Yeah, it is. It's happy. It's New Year here now. Yeah, 2017. Here we go. Here we go.